Bereshit, Genesis chapter 23. And Sarah was 107 and 20 years old. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, the same is in Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham stood up from before his dead and spoke unto the sons of Heth, saying,
I am a stranger and a sojourner with you. Give me a possession of a burying place with you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight.
And the children of Heth answered Abraham, saying unto him,
Hear us, my lord. You are a mighty prince among us. In the choice of our sepulchres bury your dead. None of us shall withhold from you his sepulchre, but that you may bury your dead.
And Abraham stood up and bowed himself to the people of the land, even to the children of Heth. And he communed with them, saying,
If it be your mind that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and entreat from me to Ephron, the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he has, which is in the end of his field. For as much money as it is worth he shall give it me, for a possession of a burying place amongst you.
And Ephron dwelt among the children of Heth. And Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the audience of the children of Heth, even all that went in the gate of his city, saying,
Nay, my lord, hear me. The field I give you, and the cave that is therein I give it you. In the presence of the sons of my people give I it you. Bury your dead.
And Abraham bowed down himself before the people of the land. And he spoke unto Ephron in the audience of the people of the land, saying,
But if you will give it, I pray you, hear me. I will give you money for the field. Take it of me, and I will bury my dead there.
And Ephron answered Abraham, saying unto him,
My lord, hearken unto me. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that betwixt me and you? Bury therefore your dead.
And Abraham hearkened unto Ephron. And Abraham weighed to Ephron the silver, which he had named in the audience of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, current money with the merchant. And the field of Ephron, which was in Machpelah, which was before Mamre, the field and the cave which was therein, and all the trees that were in the field, that were in all the borders round about, were made sure unto Abraham for a possession in the presence of the children of Heth, before all that went in at the gate of his city. And after this, Abraham buried Sarah his woman in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, the same as Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And the field and the cave that is therein were made sure unto Abraham for a possession of a burying place by the sons of Heth. Bereshit, Genesis chapter 24. And Abraham was old and well stricken in age, and Yahweh had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said unto his eldest servant of his house, that ruled over all that he had,
Put, I pray you, your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by Yahweh, the Elohai of heaven and the Elohai of the earth, that you shall not take a woman unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanim, among whom I dwell. But you shall go unto my country and to my kindred, and take a woman unto my son Yitzhak.
And the servant said unto him,
Perchance the woman will not be willing to follow me unto this land. Must I needs bring your son again unto the land from whence you came?
And Abraham said unto him,
Beware that you bring not my son thither again. Yahuwah Elohai of heaven, which took me from my father's house, and from the land of my kindred, and which spoke unto me, and that swore unto me, saying, Unto your seed will I give this land. He shall send his angel before you, and you shall take a woman unto my son from thence. And if the woman will not be willing to follow you, then you shall be clear from this my oath. Only bring not my son thither again.
And the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master, and swore to him concerning that matter. And the servant took 10 camels of the camels of his master, and departed, for all the goods of his master were in his hand. And he arose and went to Aram Naharaim, unto the city of Nahor. And he made his camels to kneel down without the city by a well of water at the time of the evening, even the time that women go out to draw water. And he said,
O Yahuwah Elohai of my master Avraham, I pray you, send me good speed this day, and show kindness unto my master Avraham. Behold, I stand here by the well of water, and the daughters of the men of the city come out to draw water. And let it come to pass, that the damsel to whom I shall say, Let down your pitcher, I pray you, that I may drink. And she shall say, Drink, and I will give your camels drink also. Let the same be she that you have appointed for your servant Yitzhak. And thereby shall I know that you have showed kindness unto my master.
And it came to pass, before he had done speaking, that behold, Ribkah came out, who was born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, the woman of Nahor, Abraham's brother, with her pitcher upon her shoulder. And the damsel was very fair to look upon, a virgin, neither had any man known her. And she went down to the well and filled her pitcher, and came up. And the servant ran to meet her and said,
Let me, I pray you, drink a little water of your pitcher.
And she said,
Drink, my lord.
And she hastened, and let down her pitcher upon her hand, and gave him drink. And when she had done giving him drink, she said,
I will draw water for your camels also, until they have done drinking.
And she hastened, and emptied her pitcher into the trough, and ran again unto the well to draw water, and drew for all his camels. And the man, wondering at her, held his peace, to wit whether Yahweh had made his journey prosperous or not. And it came to pass, as the camels had done drinking, that the man took a golden earring of 1/2 shekel weight, and 2 bracelets for her hands of 10 shekels weight of gold, and said,
Whose daughter are you? Tell me, I pray you, is there room in your father's house for us to lodge in?
And she said unto him,
I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, which she bore unto Nahor.
And she said moreover unto him,
We have both straw and provender enough, and room to lodge in.
And the man bowed down his head and worshipped Yahweh. And he said,
Blessed be Yahuwah Elohai of my master Avraham, who has not left destitute my master of his mercy and his truth. I, being in the way, Yahuwah led me to the house of my master's brethren.
And the damsel ran and told them of her mother's house of these things. And Ribkah had a brother, and his name was Laban. And Laban ran unto the man, unto the well. And it came to pass, when he saw the earring and the bracelets upon his sister's hands, and when he heard the words of Ribkah his sister, saying,
Thus spoke the man unto me.
that he came unto the man, and behold, he stood by the camels at the well. And he said,
Come in, you blessed of Yahuwah. Wherefore stand you without? For I have prepared the house and room for the camels.
And the man came into the house, and he ungirded his camels, and gave straw and provender for the camels, and water to wash his feet, and the men's feet that were with him. And there was set meat before him to eat, but he said,
I will not eat until I have told my errand.
And he said,
Speak on.
And he said,
I am Avraham's servant, and Yahuwah has blessed my master greatly, and he has become great. And he has given him flocks and herds, and silver and gold, and menservants and maidservants, and camels and asses. And Sarah, my master's woman, bore a son to my master when she was old, and unto him has he given all that he has. And my master made me swear, saying, You shall not take a woman to my son of the daughters of the Canaanim, in whose land I dwell, but you shall go unto my father's house, and to my kindred, and take a woman unto my son. And I said unto my master, Perchance the woman will not follow me. And he said unto me, Yahuwah, before whom I walk, will send his angel with you, and prosper your way. And you shall take a woman for my son of my kindred, and of my father's house. Then shall you be clear from this my oath, when you come to my kindred, and if they give not you one, you shall be clear from my oath. And I came this day unto the well, and said, O Yahuwah Elohai, of my master Avraham, if now you do prosper my way which I go, behold, I stand by the well of water. And it shall come to pass, that when the virgin comes forth to draw water, and I say to her, Give me, I pray you, a little water of your pitcher to drink. And she say to me, Both drink you, and I will also draw for your camels. Let the same be the woman whom Yahuwah has appointed out for my master's son. And before I had done speaking in my heart, behold, Rivkah came forth with her pitcher on her shoulder. And she went down unto the well, and drew water. And I said unto her, Let me drink, I pray you. And she made haste, and let down her pitcher from her shoulder, and said, Drink, and I will give your camels drink also. So I drank, and she made the camels drink also. And I asked her and said, Whose daughter are you? And she said, The daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore unto him. And I put the earring upon her face, and the bracelets upon her hands. And I bowed down my head and worshipped Yahuwah, and blessed Yahuwah Elohai of my master Avraham, which had led me in the right way to take my master's brother's daughter unto his son. And now, if ye will deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, that I may turn to the right hand or to the left.
Then Laban and Bethuel answered and said,
The thing proceeds from Yahuwah. We cannot speak unto you bad or good.
Behold, Rivkah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be your master's son's woman, as Yahuwah has spoken.
And it came to pass that when Abraham's servant heard their words, he worshipped Yahweh, bowing himself to the earth. And the servant brought forth jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment, and gave them to Ribkah. And he gave also to her brother and to her mother precious things. And they did eat and drink, and the men that were with him, and tarried all night. And they rose up in the morning, and he said,
Send me away unto my master.
And her brother and her mother said,
Let the damsel abide with us a few days, at the least 10.
After that she shall go.
And he said unto them,
Hinder me not, seeing Yahuwah has prospered my way. Send me away, that I may go to my master.
And they said,
We will call the damsel and inquire at her mouth.
And they called Ribkah and said unto her,
Will you go with this man?
And she said,
I will go.
And they sent away Ribkah their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant, and his men. And they blessed Ribkah, and said unto her,
You are our sister. Be the mother of thousands of millions, and let your seed possess the gate of those which hate them.
And Ribkah arose, and her damsels, and they rode upon the camels, and followed the man. And the servant took Ribkah, and went his way. And Yitzchak came from the way of the well of Beer Lachairoi, for he dwelt in the country of the Negeb. And Yitzchak went out to meditate in the field in the evening, and he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, the camels were coming. And Ribkah lifted her eyes, and when she saw Yitzchak, she lighted off the camel. For she had said unto the servant,
What man is this that walks in the field to meet us?
And the servant had said,
It is my master.
Therefore she took a veil and covered herself. And the servant told Yitzchak all the things that he had done. And Yitzchak brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and took Rivkah, and she became his woman, and he loved her. And Yitzchak was comforted after his mother's death. Bereshit, Genesis chapter 25. And again Abraham took a woman, and her name was Keturah. And she bore him Zimran, and Yokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Yishbak, and Shuach. And Yokshan begot Sheba, and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Ashurim, and Letushim, and Leumim. And the sons of Midian, Ephah, and Epher, and Chanok, and Abidah, and Eldaah. These were the children of Keturah. And Abraham gave all that he had unto Yitzchak, but unto the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts, and sent them away from Yitzchak his son, while he yet lived, eastward into the east country. And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life which he lived, 160 years. Then Abraham gave up his ruach, and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his sons Yitzchak and Yishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, which is before Mamre. The field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth, there was Abraham buried, and Sarah his woman. And it came to pass, after the death of Abraham, that Elohim blessed his son Yitzchak, and Yitzchak dwelt by the well Be'er Lahai-roi. Now these are the generations of Yishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar, the Mitzrayim, Sarah's handmaid, bore unto Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Yishmael, by their names, according to their generations. The firstborn of Yishmael, Nebaioth, and Kedar, and Adbeel, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Masaah, Hadar, and Tima, Yetur, Naphish, and Kedema. These are the sons of Yishmael, and these are their names, by their towns and by their castles, 12 princes according to their nations. And these are the years of the life of Yishmael, 137 years. And he gave up his ruach and died, and was gathered unto his people. And they dwelt from Havilah unto Shur, that is before Mitzrayim, as you go toward Ashura. And he died in the presence of all his brethren.
Okay, part 3. The Seed War begins. What I've been trying to do with the series that I've been doing here this weekend is draw from all, I've got a bunch of books and DVDs and stuff back there, and they kind of jump all over the place in terms of the timeline, So what I've been trying to do with this presentation is follow a linear progression of time from the creation right through to the Revelation. So that's the way the whole weekend of the 5 presentations are structured. So, we dealt with creation and nature of the earth. We went from there to the creation of Adam and the placement of Adam in what I believe the location of Eden, and talking about that. What happens next? Okay, Adam and Eve are now in the garden, and we see that they're told about the trees. You can eat from this one, but you can't eat from that one. And then we turn the page to chapter 3, and the devil's right there, starting out with the question, hath God really said? Yea, did God really say this? That's a lot of people, when it comes to especially like the flat earth issue, once their mind starts going crazy on that, if that's true, what would be the motive? Why would they, whoever they are, why would they lie to us? Well, I mean, if that is in fact true, then we got to go further back than NASA. We got to go back to the garden. Because if you remember the questions that or the statements that I made, science says the Bible says, science says the Bible says, science says the Bible said. Well, you have the devil right away going, well, did God really say that? So there's your motivation. If in fact we are in a snow globe, then the motivation is a Luciferian one that goes all the way back to that same question. Did God really say you're in a circle inscribed flat world set on pillars under a dome within which the sun, moon, and stars were placed on day 4? So that's where the motive goes all the way back to. Now, when they have this dialogue, the woman said unto the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, "You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die." And the serpent said unto the woman, "Oh, you're not going to die. God knows the day you eat of it, then your eyes are going to be open. You're going to be like gods, knowing good and evil." Keep those promises of Lucifer in mind, because we'll deal with them again later. So they tempted him, Satan tempted them in the garden. Now, whose fault was it when they got kicked out? Whose fault was it, Adam or Eve? Adam. Yeah. Now, Eve partook first, but we see in Scripture that Paul says, "Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned." What is sin? What's the definition of sin?
Transgression of Torah.
Bingo. Sin is transgression of law. In the garden, they only had one law, didn't they? Don't eat from that one tree. What did they do? They could have done anything else they wanted to do. They did the one thing they were told not to do. And they got booted out. Well, I mean, that's where we start to see the principle of disobedience equals exile from the garden. But it's actually an act of mercy, wasn't it? Because if they would have eaten from the tree of life after the knowledge of good and evil, what would have happened to them? Yeah, they would have been living in an eternal damnation. Right? So it was an act of mercy, really, an act of love that they were cast out. And like I talked about in the previous sessions there, if in fact this Yahuwah triangle thing is true, then they were sent to the east. From Shechem, if you go almost directly east, you end up in Babylon, which is a principle we see later, that when they were disobedient in the land of Israel, the Assyrians would take you out. And the Jews, of course, ended up in Babylon for 70 years. And that's because Leviticus 18, we find later, it talks about, the land will vomit you out. So I'm just going to ask the question, if we all agree, like I asked in the previous session, if the current nation sitting over there calling itself Israel is not obeying God, what do you think is going to happen to them?
They're going to be vomited out.
What's that going to do to standard evangelical Christian ideas about the promised land?
It's going to rock the world and destroy them.
I think it will too. Yeah.
It would cause a great falling away.
Well, it sure would. Because so much of the modern eschatology is built on saying Israel became a nation in 1948. This generation shall not pass away till, Actually, if you go back and read that, it's not really talking. When it says this generation shall not pass away, it has nothing to do with the nation of Israel being reestablished. He goes through all this list of things that are going to happen, But in the list of Matthew 24, you don't see him saying. But then when you see the regathering together of Israel, this generation that sees that's not going to pass away. But that's what everybody teaches, isn't it?
Yes.
No, go back and read Matthew 24. See if it says anywhere Israel's going to be founded as a nation first, and then when you see this generation is not going to pass away until it's all fulfilled. Right? That's sort of like where it says, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. But of that day knoweth no man, only my Father in heaven." And not even the angels know. How many of you have heard, well, Jesus doesn't even know when he's coming back. The rapture is a secret event. See, only the Father knows. Go read that scripture. It says, "Heaven and earth will pass away. My words will not pass away. But of that day," what's the antecedent? What's the subject? The destruction of heaven and earth.
Yeah.
Of that day, which day? The previous sentence, heaven and earth are going to pass away, but my words are not going to pass away. But of that day. So we've been taught wrong and we've just accepted it.
Yeah.
And I've went around parroting that myself. See, Jesus doesn't even know when he comes back. Only Dad knows. That's not what it's talking about there. So the land spews them out, and I fear for a lot of people who have wrapped their whole belief system around the 1948 thing, because Zephaniah 2 says, "Gather yourselves together, O nation undesired," and the connotation is you're going to be judged. And Zechariah 13 tells you 2/3 of that place is going to die, and 1/3 is going through the fire. How is that the promise we've all been waiting for? So, I really worry for a lot of my, eschatological, buddies and prophecy and whatnot that are dispensational preacher of rapture. When 2/3 are killed, and what does 1/3 going through the fire mean? I don't know, but it doesn't sound good. What's that going to do? I'm worried for them. Now, obviously, a nation calling itself Israel needs to be in place because we do see things that take place in the last days in that context. But the promise that we're all looking for that everybody wants to assign to 1948, Isaiah 66:8. Can a nation be born in a day? Yeah, May 14th, 1948. No. Chapter 66 is in a millennial reign context. Read chapter 65 to understand the context of chapter 66. Chapter 65 is in a millennial reign context. In chapter 66, everybody quotes 66:8, but if you read 4 verses later, 66:12 says, peace will flow like a river from that place. Have we had anything but peace? We've had anything but peace since 1948. We haven't had peace there. So clearly, Isaiah 66:8 cannot apply to 1948. Jeremiah 23 can't apply to it. Jeremiah 30, Jeremiah 31, the entire book of Hosea, Ezekiel 37, the two sticks coming together. Did that happen in 1948? If you go through Ezekiel 37 line by line, because you've heard a lot of people say, 1948 was the beginning of the bones coming together, right? And then the flesh will be put on them and blah, blah, blah. I taught it myself. But if you go through Ezekiel 37 line by line and just ask yourself, did that happen? No. Did that happen? No. Did that happen? No. Why are we all saying it did? It didn't happen yet. There's a greater exodus coming. And I talked about that at the beginning of this, especially when I realized Revelation is an amped up repeat of Exodus. I'm looking for almost a play-by-play repeat, just amped up to take place. Did anybody fly up into the sky during the Exodus? No, they saw amazing miracles where God showed up right in front of them and took them out. And all the scriptures regarding the last days ingathering of Israel that we're all hoping for and looking for, God consistently says, I'm going to do it. Me. Because a lot of people will say, well, because we say, well, the Rothschilds, the Zionists, and the Freemasons are the ones really to put in the United Nations that put 1948 together. And so some people will say, well, God can use pagans to accomplish his will. Yes, he can. But Amos 3:7 says he's not going to do anything except he tells his prophets first what he's going to do. So when he uses pagans to accomplish his will, he says, this is how I'm going to do it. Like with Cyrus. Cyrus was, I believe, named before he even did what he did. And so when Cyrus did what he did, it was a fulfillment of a prior prophecy that said it's going to happen this way. So all of the ingathering of Israel scriptures that I read keep saying, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to believe you. And I'm going to wait and look forward to that. So, looking at Leviticus 18, I can't see how they can, unless they have a massive revival and start changing everything, forget the Talmud, get back to the Torah, and as a nation start obeying it, then this scripture is going to have to apply. The land vomits you out. And Leviticus 26 gets even worse. If you keep reading about the curses of disobedience and the blessings of obedience. So getting back to the Adam and Eve story, they got booted out because of disobeying one command, right? And so wherever they ended up, I think they ended up in the vicinity of Babylon. It's not too long after they got booted out, you see Cain killing Abel. The one who had a predisposition to listening to the evil one killed the one who was the good one, right? Why? Because the devil in that whole thing, when God came down in Genesis 3 and saw what the devil had deceived Adam and Eve and they ate, there was the first prophecy in the Bible is in Genesis 3 where God tells the serpent that Eve's seed is going to crush his head. Well, if you're receiving that prophecy, that's a bad thing, right? Getting your head crushed, that's not good. So if you're receiving that prophecy, her seed's going to crush your head, what do you think you're going to do to her seed? You're going to get rid of it, aren't you? As quickly as possible. Well, here's the beginning of that seed war. Cain kills Abel. So then Cain's banished, right? He gets the mark and a whole deal, and he goes out. And then Adam and Eve have another son, Seth. Well, if you are a parent of twins, let's say, and one of them kills the other, and then you have a third child, do you think you might just be a little bit protective over this next child, considering what the other child did to your other one? Yeah, I don't think the devil was really able to get to Seth. So perhaps plan B, we turn to Genesis chapter 6, and the Genesis 6 experiment is what I call it. What took place in Genesis 6. The first thing I'm going to address is the sons of God or the sons of Seth. There are a lot of people, and I'm finding this more and more in the Torah communities, parroting the same thing that is coming out of seminaries and standard evangelical Christianity. They teach in the seminaries that the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6 were the good sons of Seth mating with the bad daughters of Cain. Okay, so let's address that. And I'm seeing the same thing in the Torah communities. They're saying this, they're just parroting that. Going back to the whisper down the lane idea, is you get the closer you get to the original source material, they all believed it was angels. The sons of God was a reference to angels coming down and mating with women. You get 6,000 years later, and you got, well, we heard the sons of Seth mated with Cain's daughters. Text doesn't say that. Open your Bible if you've got it to Genesis chapter 6, 1 through 4, and see if you see anything in there mentioning Seth or Cain. Nothing there. In the synchronized biblically endorsed extra biblical text, we of course get a lot more information, and it's all again compiled in this volume all together here. If you look in the testimony of Genesis with some of these other ones, Genesis says the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took wives of all which they chose. Syncing right up to the same chapter and verse numbers, 1 Enoch chapter 6, 1 and 2, says the angels, the children of heaven, were the ones that did this. The book of Jubilees comes right out and tells you point blank, the angels of God saw the women, and they did what they did. There is absolutely nothing in Genesis 6 which in any way refers to Seth or Cain or their offspring. Rather, the phrase sons of God is a reference applied to angels, just as it was in the book of Job, which actually predates Genesis. We talked about that in the previous session, where we have the creation account going on right here, and the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Right here, where just a simple question, were the good sons of Seth present at creation? No, of course not. But the angels sure were. We have numerous other accounts of other writers. 50 AD, Philo, in his work Questions and Answers on Genesis, Book 1, point number 92, says, these giants were sprung from a combined procreation of two natures, namely, from angels and mortal women. But sometimes Moses styles the angels the sons of God. So he's saying, Moses chose the title for angels sometimes to be referred to as sons of God, which maybe he got it from Job or from Enoch, either way. Clement is a disciple of Peter. He talks about the same thing in excerpt from a homily number 8, chapter 13. It says, but when having assumed these forms, the angels, they convicted as covetous those who stole them and changed themselves into the nature of men, in order that, living holily and showing the possibility of so living, they might subject ungrateful to punishment, yet having become in all respects men, they also partook of human lust, and being brought tinder its subjection, they fell into cohabitation with women. A little bit cryptic, but you get the idea of what he's talking about there. Josephus, writing in Antiquities of the Jews, Book 1, Chapter 3, and Book 5, Chapter 2.3, Josephus says, for many angels of God accompanied with women and begat sons that proved unjust and despisers of all that was good on account of the confidence they had in their own strength. For the tradition is that these men did what resembled the acts of those whom the Grecians call giants. And he says again, for which reason they removed their camp to Hebron, and when they had taken it, they slew the inhabitants. There were till then left the race of giants who had bodies so large and countenances so entirely different from other men, that they were surprising to the sight and terrible to the hearing. The bones of these men are still shown to this day, unlike to any credible relations of other men. So he's basically saying, we've got the museum of the giants here, this is the first 100 years AD or so, 100 AD thereabouts, that they still had the museum of the bones of the giants that were the offspring of the angels. Now, reading through the text, we see that this is where they landed. Oh, by the way, this map right here, this is a variation of the Mercator map. The Mercator map is the map where they unroll the ball into a flat map. We've all seen it in the classrooms. We've seen, this is a variation of it. The one we've seen in the classrooms, this one you can tell everything looks kind of curved at the top, even though it's it's a rectangular thing, but you can see the sort of the perspective skewing there. The Mercator map, though, and even in this map, look how big Greenland looks right there. On the Mercator map, Greenland's almost as big as Africa. But if you look up the actual dimensions of Greenland, it's like not a whole lot bigger than Texas. So even on the ball maps that we've all seen our whole life, the maps are all wrong. There was a West Wing episode, in fact, on the TV show West Wing, where they had some experts come in and they were showing all the problems, and they were trying to lobby for the new maps to be put into schools. And they're showing how all the scales are completely wrong of everything that we've all seen, that we all grew up with. It's all wrong.
The German cartographer, Mercator, originally designed this map in 1569 as a navigational tool for European sailors.
The map enlarges areas at the poles to create straight lines of constant bearing or geographic direction.
So it makes it easier to cross an ocean.
But
Yes.
it distorts the relative size of nations and continents.
Are you saying the map is wrong?
Oh dear, yes. Look at Greenland.
Okay.
Now look at Africa.
Okay.
The two land masses appear to be roughly the same size.
Yes.
Would it blow your mind if I told you that Africa is in reality 14 times larger?
Yes. Here we have Europe drawn considerably larger than South America. When it's 6.9 million square miles, South America is almost double the size of Europe's 3.8 million.
Alaska appears 3 times as large as Mexico, when Mexico is larger by 0.1 million square miles.
Germany appears in the middle of the map when it's in the northernmost quarter of the Earth.
Wait. Relative size is one thing, but you're telling me that Germany isn't where we think it is?
Nothing is where you think it is.
So, like I said earlier, I'm still looking at everything going, what is the truth here? Because even what we've been told about the ball is a lie. Or at least inaccurate, if not intentionally, a lie here. Regardless, if we stretched out the earth, whatever shape it may be, that's where the fallen angels landed in the days of Jared, according to the book of Enoch. Now, a researcher by the name of David Flynn pointed something out really interesting based on this map, that it was 33.33 degrees north by 33.33 degrees east from the Paris prime meridian, which was the original prime meridian before they changed it to Greenwich for political reasons and whatnot. And in the occult, the Paris prime meridian was known as the Devil's Line. So if you looked at it, like the Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code or any of that stuff, he pointed out some of those things. But if going from the original prime meridian, it was 33.33 degrees north by 33.33 degrees east from the Paris prime meridian. And he also noticed that it was 2,012 nautical miles from that location to the Paris prime meridian and 2,012 nautical miles from that location to the equator, which caused a lot of researchers to kind of scratch their head and wonder if there's some kind of connection that might happen on the infamous date of December 21st, 2012, which of course I don't believe anything did happen at the time, but there were a lot of interesting numbers to look at. Now, while those numbers may be interesting, if in fact the whole globe thing is a lie, then these numbers probably go out the window anyway. But interesting nonetheless. So Genesis 6, Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also after that when the sons of God, angels, came unto the daughters of men. Now, even in the Sethite theory, that doesn't make sense, the wording, does it? Because Seth is still men. They're still people, right? So the way it's worded, the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, clearly you got two types being referred to here. Linguistically, it makes no sense to go the route of kissing cousins. Now, I've titled this the Archon Invasion, so let me just address the word Archon. It shows up, it's just a Greek word. It's used, for instance, in Ephesians 2:2, talk about the prince of the power of the air. Like I said, it's just a Greek word. It's a masculine noun that means chief, ruler, prince, leader, somebody in a position, a commander of a position of authority, basically. The book of Enoch names 20 archons of the 200 watcher class angels who sinned with the daughters of men. We see in 1 Enoch chapter 6 that it was in the days of Jared that they landed on Mount Hermon, and here are a bunch of names. These are what I would consider to be the archons. They were the leaders over the rest of the 200. I showed a little bit of this in one of the previous sessions, a pre-flood Nephilim timeline. If my calculations are correct, I believe the Genesis 6 experiment, when the angels came down and mated with women in the days of Jared, took place in about 3550 BC. And the book of Enoch tells us that the first generation Nephilim offspring, the direct offspring of angels that mated with women, would only live for 500 years. And in those 500 years, they were to kill each other off in a massive civil war that the Greeks eventually stylized into what became known as the Clash of the Titans. So we've seen the movies and stuff like that. That goes back to this original first generation Nephilim civil war. Josephus likens the first generation to the Titans of Greek mythology. So go forward 500 years from 3550, end up in about the 3050 to 3000 year BC time frame. And when you get close to that 3000, you start seeing all kinds of interesting things. The Mayan Aztec calendar stones shows up 3114 BC. That's where everybody got the December 21st, 2012 deal. Just real quick on that, a lot of us, as we were getting close to 2012, December 21st, we're speculating on what might happen because the ancients were clearly pointing to that date. There's no doubt about it. Problem is our calendars are off. When you do the research, you realize that Yeshua was born on September 11th, 3 BC. On the Gregorian calendar, that's reckoned as -2. So if it's reckoned as -2, then our calendars are off by 2 years. I believe the date that the ancients were really pointing toward was December 21st, 2010. And on that night, the moon went blood red over the shoulders of Orion, looking like a decapitated head. At the same time, Iraq announced its fully formed government, and the entire planet shook. There were earthquake meters that checked earthquake activity. All of them went into the black that night. So the whole world was shaking. Right after that, we had fish and bird die-offs. You know, hundreds of thousands of birds falling from the sky just for no apparent reason. Millions of fish beaching themselves for no apparent reason. And breed specific at that. It wasn't like a whole bunch of birds. It was like one type of bird or one type of fish. And then the people who track the constellations or whatnot, they said we need to add the 13th sign to the zodiac. You know, we have the 12 signs of the zodiac. Well, they said we need to add a new one. And the new one they added was Ophiuchus, which in the mythology was a character named Asclepius, who is known for raising Orion from the dead. And Orion, in the original meaning God had, is Yeshua. But the occult usurped it for Osiris, who is Nimrod. So there were a lot of crazy things that happened on the night of December 21st, 2010, and immediately following. And my take on it is, if all of those things would have happened on December 21st, 2012, everybody in their talking parrot would have been, you know, writing books and on TV and you name it. But nobody was talking about it because hardly anybody picked up on what was happening because they're all looking for 2012 when all these amazing things happened in 2010 on the same date, December 21st. So if Yeshua is born in -2 and our calendar is based on the birth of Yeshua, then our calendars are off. Does that make sense? So the event that these guys were pointing toward, really, in my opinion, was the December 21st, 2010 event. Everybody missed it because the calendars were off for 2 years. Then you have Adam dying about 20 years later, the death of the first man. Shortly after that, about 20, 25 years later, the first generation Nephilim are done. The civil war is over. They're all been killed off. They're dead. Then shortly after that, their parents, the Watchers, were judged, bound, and buried. And then Enoch is raptured. This is about 700 years before the flood. So that begs the question then, okay, and Noah's born, and his daddy names him Rest. That's what Noah's name means, Rest. So, well, you can see after the Clash of the Titans, everybody took a deep breath. Well, okay, we're glad that was over with. But from the birth of Noah, we had 600 more years to the flood. So what got God so upset 600 years later to wipe out the world with a flood when all this is taken care of 700 years before the flood? Well, that leads into a discussion of what they call multiple incursions. A lot of people who study the subject of the Nephilim believe that when it's talking in Genesis 6 and it says, and also after that, that means the angels kept coming back again and again and continued to mate with women after the flood. I disagree with that because I believe Moses disagrees with that. If you just look at this in light of what we learned in the book of Enoch, Genesis 6 then reads, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. What days? The days of Jared. Watchers came down in the days of Jared. And also after that. What does that mean? That means the days of Jared. When the sons of God came unto the daughters of men in the days of Jared, and they bare children to them, the same who were born in the days of Jared, were the mighty men that were of old. And the word old there is in Hebrew the word olam, which is translated like 136 times. 136 times as everlasting and 110 times as forever. In other words, it's a word that you use for a very long time ago. It's not the word Moses would have used for the giants they just saw in the land of Canaan last week. He's saying the same that we're talking about here are from Olam, long time ago. It became the men of renown, the gods of the mythology, essentially. So there's nothing in Genesis 6 that would throw you into the post-flood world. Everything's still very much in a pre-flood context. Now, we have to realize that when the angels did what they did, they faced a severe judgment by God. We read about the judgment in the book of Enoch. It goes into a great amount of detail. This is where it tells you that they will only live for 500 years, the Nephilim offspring. The parents, the watchers, had to watch their own children, who they loved. They called them the beloved ones. The parents had to watch their own children massacre each other. Any parents here? How would you like to see your own kids massacre each other? That'd be pretty horrific, wouldn't it? That'd be terrible, awful. Well, that was part of their judgment. Part of their judgment was to watch their own children kill each other off. Then they received an even more severe judgment when they were bound in chains and put in Tartarus, a terrible place of punishment. So in my Mount Hermon Roswell Connection DVD, I give 5 reasons why I do not believe angels ever came back to mate with women again. Obviously, the judgment was extremely severe. There's no confirming scriptures. The Bible says we need 2 to 3 witnesses to establish truth. It says that in several places. So if the assumption is that Genesis 6, where it says, and also after that, is a reference to another incursion of angels mating with women, where's your confirming scripture? Give me one other verse that says that angels mated with women. Not there. So the size also began to drop dramatically in the post-flood world. In the pre-flood world, these things are huge, like mind-bogglingly huge. In the post-flood world, you have the Amorites are the size of cedar trees. They're 36 feet tall. And you work your way down, you get Og of Bashan, who's 15 to 18 feet tall. Then you get Goliath, who's about 9 to 12 feet tall. Still very imposing, scary guys, but clearly the further you get away from the flood, on the post-flood side, their size is dropping. Why? If you just mate with an angel, according to Enoch, they become huge, really big giants. The world would become corrupted 5 times over. In 1,200 years from the time of the days of Jared is about 1,200 years before the flood, it says in Genesis 6 that all flesh should become corrupted. It got so bad that God had the only option he had was to clean everything out and start over again with the flood. Well, if they were able to corrupt all flesh in 1,200 years by this one incursion of 200 angels, that from a military perspective, that's a pretty effective campaign. If I was a general, let's say like Lucifer, and the 200 watchers were a platoon for a military campaign, and my platoon was so successful that they corrupted all of my enemy's creation in 1,200 years, round 2, 400. Let's get this thing over with. Get 500, They've had 5 times the amount of time to completely corrupt all flesh if they're going to do multiple incursions. How come we're still here? No, didn't happen. When it comes to things like alien abductions, you always hear reports of extraction of seed, extraction of eggs, of scientific laboratory experiments where people are being tortured and experimented on, and they're growing hybrids in containers and stuff like that. Well, why go through all that if all you got to do is have sex? I mean, that's kind of ridiculous. So these are the 5 reasons why I don't believe there was another incursion. Do angels fear? Yeah, absolutely. Before they even got started, Samjaza, the leader of the fallen angels, said before they even got started, he said, look, I fear you will not agree to do this deed with me. He's basically like, we know what we're about to do is a great sin, and I'm afraid I'm going to go through with it, and you guys are going to leave me hanging. You're not going to. And so everybody's like, no, we're all with you, dude. And so they did a mutual vow. They swore amongst each other, no, we're all in. We're all going to do this deal. And Mount Hermon was named Mount Hermon because apparently the word has something to do with taking a vow. That's why they named it. When the judgment came upon them in chapter 13, it says they were all afraid, and fear and trembling seized them. Who's the mightiest of all the angels?
Lucifer.
Who beats Lucifer?
Oh, Michael.
Michael.
Yeah.
So Michael is the mightiest of all the angels. Then, right? Lucifer is obviously a very powerful cherub, but we see in Revelation 12 that Michael goes to fight a war, right? And he's victorious. So Michael's the mightiest of all the angels of God. Well, in Enoch chapter 68, the mighty archangel Michael himself is looking at the judgment of the watchers, and it says, this thing makes me tremble because of the severity of the judgment of the secrets of the judgment of the angels. He's like, who would not be troubled by looking at this? To paraphrase, he's talking to Raphael, and he's like, dude, wow, no one's ever going to do that again. Look at how bad the judgment is on these guys. And he prophesies at the end, he says, neither angel nor man shall have his portion in it, but alone they have received their judgment forever and ever. He just prophesied, nobody else is going to do this, because the penalty for doing it is so severe that even Michael, the archangel himself, is like, whoa, wow, I'm trembling in my boots here, Raphael. So the angels that did that are the ones that sinned and left their first estate that we read about in 2 Peter and in Jude. Where 2 Peter 2:4 says, for God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell. The Greek word there is Tartarus. In Greek mythology, Tartarus is the prison of the gods, the Titans and whatnot. So a lot of people who don't believe in the angels version of Genesis 6 and believe the Sethite view, they've got a big problem with these verses. Because who's he talking about there? Satan and his angels? No, they haven't been bound in chains. They're still out and about, aren't they? They don't get defeated until Revelation 12. And there's a war in heaven. They're all kicked out. He's still going about as a roaring lion. Paul said we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, spiritual wickedness. These are the guys that are still with Lucifer. They haven't been bound up yet. The only ones that got bound up were the ones who participated in the Genesis 6 experiment. And Jude says, the angels which kept not the first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Where did these two guys get that information? There's nowhere in the canonized text that even remotely hints at what they're talking about. Well, obviously they had read the book of Enoch, because that book gives all the details that's perfectly in line with what both of these guys said right there. So, for me, I'm like, well, if it's good enough for these guys to read the book, maybe I should read it too. Maybe it might teach me a thing or two. Work for these guys. So again, this is what's going on here. There is no further written documentation of any other incursions of angels mating with women in the Bible. But there is evidence of a pre-flood return of the Nephilim. So you have the first generation Nephilim had the Clash of the Titans Civil War, and they're all killed off by about 3000 BC. Well, you still got 700 more years for the flood. So what's going on in the 700 years that got God so upset and that's corrupted all flesh? Well, this is where I really began to see the value of the books of Enoch, Joshua, and Jubilees, and why I started calling them the synchronized, biblically endorsed extra-biblical texts. Because when you sync them up in chronological order with the story given in Genesis, we are given a really detailed account of what happened. In Genesis 6, 1 through 4, we see angels mating with women. That syncs up with the text you see there in red. Genesis 6, 5 through 7 shows how God feels about the resulting violence. That syncs up with the text you see there in red. And Genesis 8 through 10 reveals how Noah and his sons were genetically pure. Where it says that Noah was found pure, righteous in his generations, the word there is tamim. It's the same Hebrew word used for the red heifer without spot or blemish. It's a word used for genetic purity. So, and he married, according to the text, Naamah, who was the daughter of Enoch. And Enoch was, of course, so righteous that God took him. So clearly it was a good pick for Noah. Married an older woman. I think she was about 100 years older than him. But in those days, when you're living to 1,000 years, I mean, so if Noah and his wife are genetically pure, it stands then to reason that Shem, Ham, and Japheth were equally pure. They're genetically pure, right? So the three sons of Noah and his family, immediate family, are pure. But then in Genesis 6, 11 through 12, All of a sudden, all flesh becomes corrupted. How much is all? Okay. All is all except for the exception we're given in the previous two verses, right? So it's saying all but these had problems. That syncs up with the text you see there. And then Genesis 6:13 through 17 shows how God grows increasingly angry, and he tells Noah, hey, you got to build an ark, and here's how to do it, because I'm going to judge the world. And then in verse 18, we see the first mention of the 3 wives of Noah's 3 sons. Quick quiz, which comes first, 12 or 18? 12 comes first. 18 comes after 12, right? So the first mention of the 3 wives comes after 12, and 12 says all flesh became corrupted. Uh-oh. Yeah. How did all flesh become corrupted? How did they become corrupted? Well, Genesis 6:12 says that God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh corrupted his way upon the earth. Let's unpack that. Joshua 4:18 tells us, and their judges and rulers went to the daughters of men and took their wives by force from their husbands according to their choice. And the sons of men in those days took from the cattle of the earth and the beasts of the field and fowls of the air, and taught the mixture of animals of one species with the other, in order therewith to provoke the Lord. And God saw the whole earth, and it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways on the earth, all men and all animals. So that tells you how the corruption took place, through transhuman experimentation, the blending of species. Further, second witness in Jubilees, where it says, and after this. The after this of Jubilees 7:24 is identical to the after that of Genesis 6:4, which says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also after that, pre-flood context. Jubilees is in a pre-flood context right here, where Noah is giving a recap of what led up to the flood. He says in a pre-flood context, and after this, they sinned against the beasts and the birds and all that moved and walked on the earth, and much blood was shed on the earth, and every imagination, desire of men imagined vanity and evil continually. When I started to think about the sin against the animals, I began to realize that this was a reference to genetic manipulation, which led to the animal-human hybrids of mythology. Now, I don't care which mythology you're looking into. The Greek mythology is the most famous that we're all aware of, because we had to read the Odyssey and the Iliad and stuff in school, and they're making lots of movies out of it. But if you notice, there's a new movie coming out about the Egyptian gods, and they got hybrids in it too. This movie's about to be released if it's not already. All of the ancient cultures have various renditions of animal-human hybrids. And I believe this appears to have made a way for the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim to have host bodies to once again inhabit, thus bringing about their return. What am I talking about? Enoch says that when you kill an angel-human hybrid, Nephilim, that their spirit goes out and becomes a wandering evil spirit known as a demon. So there's a difference between fallen angels and demons. Fallen angels are fallen angels. They have bodies of their own to get around just fine. Demons, on the other hand, are always looking for a body to get into, aren't they? Remember, Yeshua's going to cast out the demon-possessed man. They're like, hey, put us in the pigs, you know. They're always looking for a body to get into. So when you kill a Nephilim, the spirit goes out and it's looking for a new body. Well, in Scripture, we see that Paul says that there's one flesh for birds and one flesh for animals, one for humans and stuff. He's saying that God made each with a specific type of body, specific type of flesh. And when we read about Adam, his creation, God breathed into his nostrils and said he became a living soul. The Hebrew word translated into English as soul is nephesh. It's the same exact word used for the creation of the living creatures, the animals, nephesh. So I believe there is a God-prescribed nephesh for each kind that God created. That's why he says it's real important that everything reproduces after its own kind. So there's a God-prescribed nephesh for a goat, for a cow, for a dog, for a human. Well, what happens when you blend a human with a goat? You don't have a God-prescribed nephesh. There's no goat man, Seder nephesh. You don't have a God-prescribed nephesh to go into a goat human. So effectively all you've done is create a host body that's fit. If it ain't got a spirit from God to go into, what other spirit could go into it? Well, you got all these disembodied former Nephilim out there looking for bodies. So I believe that was sort of plan B to bring about their return into a physical form. And Dr. Judd Burton has a great quote in his book, Interview with the Giant, regarding this. He said, despite the loss of their physical bodies, the first generation Nephilim, there is reason to believe that the giants' spirits continued to exist. In this state, they were and are demonic entities. Like other sentient creatures, they have an eternal spirit at their essence. Therefore, the Nephilim and related tribes of giants never really ceased to exist. Only their physicality was lost. Their disembodied spirits are still going out there. So if you've ever seen documentaries on legitimate demon possession, I mean, we've seen the movies and stuff, but yeah, I mean, how does a 12-year-old girl throw 6 foot tall, 5 or 6 6 foot tall men off of her like ragdolls, just little girl throwing men around? Well, she's got the spirit of a 15 or 18 footer giant in her, probably. Yeah. Oh, there you go.
And I mean, that just truly makes so many encounters that I've had just.
Yeah, because they literally do have supernatural strength that defies, you're looking at this frail little girl or boy or what have you, but yet they're able to do amazing
6 or 7 grown men
to hold them down. And they're just throwing, I mean, when you read the Maniac of Gadara there, it said they bound him with chains and stuff, and he just ripped the chains off of him. He's like, whatever. He's running around naked out there in the, in the cemetery or what have you. So, yeah, that will help you understand what's going on with demon possession, because the kids are literally, and people, humans, are being possessed by very large spirits inside of them. And so, to enlarge the graphic I showed you earlier, you'll see in the latter years leading up to the flood, I've got the minotaurs and the hybrids and whatnot, but I also put T-Rex there. I do believe the dinosaurs were created by God, but I believe that the herbivore class dinosaurs, the vegetarian dinosaurs, were created by God. If you read the account of Job, behold now behemoth, his tail moves like a cedar tree. And this is one of the things I always used to check when I was looking for Bible translations, is to see how they translate that. King James says behemoth. Some of the newer translations say hippo. I'm like, have you ever seen the tail of a hippo? Doesn't move like a cedar tree.
It was like a sapling.
Yeah. Or an elephant, same problem. But if you think of a sauropod class dinosaur, and a brontosaurus, a patasaurus, what have you, and read behemoth, the description fits. A long neck, long tailed dinosaur is a pretty good description of behemoth given in the book of Job. So I believe God created the vegetarian class dinosaurs, but we see in the text I read earlier that they took lizards and fish and birds and animals and were blending stuff together. So could it be that this class of dinosaur, the velociraptors, all the stuff we see on Jurassic Park, were genetically engineered from existing lizards? Well, interesting, if you watch the movie, that was the premise of the movie. They had some DNA intact from ancient dinosaurs, but they filled in the gaps with frogs and lizards and crocodiles and other lizard creatures. And the last Jurassic Park movie, they create this super T-Rex that was the worst of everything ever, but it was a genetically engineered creature. So Solomon said, what has been will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. I believe this took place in the last 120 years leading up to the flood, in the latter days of Methuselah, that we had the genetic experimentation, blending of species that led to and also after that, corruption of all flesh in that 700 year, really the last 120 years leading up to the flood. And so as I was contemplating this stuff, I had Doug Hamp's book, Corrupting the Image, and Tom and Nita Horn's book, Forbidden Gates, both sitting on my desk in this order. Doug Hamp's book on the left and Tom and Nita Horn's on the right. And I'm going, wow, what if that's the formula? What if the formula is corrupting the image, the original kinds that God created? What if the act of corrupting those images, the original kinds God created, actually leads to open up forbidden gates that bring about the creation of corrupted all flesh, or Nephilim? I believe that is true. And thus I would extend the definition of Nephilim to not just mean angel-human hybrid, because clearly an animal-human hybrid fits the same class of an abomination in God's eyes, or a fallen one. That's what Nephilim comes from, the fall, to fall. Something that has fallen from the original state God created it to be. Does that make sense? As I was thinking about that, one of the Spider-Man movies came out, and it was the movie with his enemy was the lizard. And in that movie, this guy right here was a scientist, and he had lost his arm, from the elbow down. And he's trying to figure out what is it? What is the genetic code in lizards? You know, you can cut their tail off, but it grows back. So what is the genetic code that makes that happen? So he starts experimenting on mice and stuff and cuts off rat legs and whatnot and injects the rat with lizard DNA, trying to figure out, you know, how is it going to work? And finally he gets one, it works. The leg grows back. He's like, aha, I've got it figured out. So he injects his stump. Well, sure enough, his arm grows back. Yay, that's awesome. But he had an unfortunate side effect. He became a giant lizard man who had only evil continually in his heart and mind throughout the rest of the movie. So here's a guy who started out with good intentions, a good guy. You know, obviously he wants to grow his own arm back, but to help other people who have lost limbs, that's noble. You know, that's a good thing, right? Help amputees, that'd be great. But as soon as he started blending human and other animal DNA, it changed him. Not only did his arm grow back, but he became a very evil person after that when he was previously a good person. So when you read in Genesis where it says all flesh became corrupted, and you read that men had only evil continually in their heart and mind, we got to figure out why. There have been a lot of evil people in history that have done very bad things, but they still had a tender moment of love with their parent or their child or their spouse, right? They didn't have only evil continually. But when scientists start blending species together, they're playing with codes and they don't know what the result's going to be. And I believe that the corruption of flesh that comes through transhumanism, one of the byproducts is violence. Only evil continually. So then we have this flood, and all of a sudden after the flood, there's still giants around. They show up almost immediately after the flood. I did another timeline chart. I told you I had two of them here. This is the other one. The 350 post-flood years of Noah, because he lived 950 years, 600 before, 350 after. They show up almost immediately, the giants, in the timeline here. But this verse, chapter 9, verse 18 and 19, is in my mind the smoking gun that obliterates any idea of a multiple incursion. Because Moses says, and the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan, who fathered the Canaanite giants. All the giants in the land were Canaanites, right? Well, why does Moses go out of his way to say, okay, here are the three sons, and oh, by the way, Ham's the father of Canaan? Not an angel. He's telling you something here. And if you don't get it, he further elaborates in verse 19. These are the three sons of Noah, and from them was the whole earth overspread. That's King James. Other translations say populated. So 850 years after the flood, Moses is writing and said the whole world was populated by these three guys right here. No mention of angels showing up to create more Nephilim, and yet we still have giants. So how'd that happen? Well, we talked about it earlier. If Shem, Ham, and Japheth are pure, just because Noah and his wife are pure, and 18 follows 12, the first mention of the wives comes after 12. Well, to me, Occam's razor, right? Easiest solution has got to be the wives. And so when you look at the family tree, especially going through the lineage of Ham, he had 4 children, Canaan, Mitzrayim, Put, and Cush. Lots of giants in Canaan. Those are all the Amorites, Hittites, Jebusites, Girgashites. Everywhere you see God say, utterly destroy. Kill the women, kill the children, kill the animals, wipe out everything. It's that list of people right there. The children of Canaan. From Genesis chapter 10, verses 6 through 20. Lots of giants of Canaan. There's at least one giant in Mitzrayim, and that's Caphtor. Caphtor is the father of the Philistines. Well, we know about giants and Philistines, right? Goliath, the most famous. Caphtor settled the island of Crete. In fact, Crete used to be known as Caphtorim, the Caphtorim island, because that's where Caphtor settled. Well, all of Greek mythology originates from Crete. So if you want to know where the Greek gods come from, and the Cyclops and the Minotaur and all that stuff, our buddy Caphtor settled Crete. There's no giants that I'm aware of in Put's lineage, and there's at least one that I can find in Cush, but he wasn't born that way. That's Nimrod. It says that Nimrod began to become a giant. So I believe that he did something to himself to become that way. I don't believe he was genetically born that way. Amorites are mentioned over 80 times in the Bible. Philistines over 200 times in the Bible. And both of them came right through the offspring of Ham. There are no giants in the offspring of Shem that I was able to find. That's a good thing, because who comes through the line of Shem? Yeshua. And there are still some giants in Japheth's line. Now, you won't get this reading Scripture. Scripture doesn't record this. But if you just do a Google search on Gog and Magog, look up Gog and Magog on Google search, do Gog and Magog plus giant, and you'll see that throughout the historical record, Gog and Magog were known and understood to have been giants. In fact, even to this day, they march two big giants through the streets of the UK in what's called the Lord Mayor Parade. Every year they march the giants of Gog and Magog through the streets of the UK, the Lord Mayor Parade. I stood on the Great Wall of China, I believe it was 2006, and that thing's massive. That thing is just so huge. I mean, see all these little dots down here? These are people. Look how big that thing is. Came to find out that the Great Wall of China was originally known as the ramparts of Gog and Magog. Well, that makes sense. If Gog and Magog were giants, building a structure like that makes perfect sense. I mean, if the Chinese were just worried about keeping out 6-foot-tall invaders, the Great Wall of China is a serious overkill. But if they're trying to keep out 12, 15, 18 footers, Great Wall of China makes perfect sense. And so Gog and Magog come through the line of Japheth. And if that's true, then we may have to rethink Ezekiel 39, the Ezekiel 39 and 40 war of Gog and Magog in the last days. Maybe talking about giants.
Makes sense why the Huns were such a force.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
They were the meanest of all. That's why the Great Wall of China was built.
Yeah.
The Huns, and so they were, that makes sense.
It could, yeah. In fact, Geico, the Geico commercials, the kind of funny Geico commercials, they actually get this. There's a Geico commercial that shows they look like a bunch of Huns or whatnot, Mongolians or whatever, coming up on the Great Wall of China. And when they come up to the Great Wall of China, it's like waist high, so they're giants. They walk up and they're like, what do we do? And the other guy's looking at it, he goes, he steps over it, keeps walking, I'm like, it's funny, but they may have it right when you look at the ancient record. So in Genesis 6:20, where God is commanding the animals to be brought on the board, it says, brought on board the ark, it says, of fowls after their kind, and of cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing of the earth after his kind, 2 of every sort shall come unto thee to keep them alive. You see the repetitive phrase there in bold? After their kind. But in Genesis 7, when it comes to the humans, it just says they, and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. That phrase, after their kind, is curiously missing from the humans. Why is he so specific about everything else except for the humans? Why didn't it say the humans after their kind? I don't know. 15 cubits upward the waters did prevail, and the mountains were covered, and all the flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl, and of cattle, and of beasts, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land died. What phrase is missing from all that died? After their kind. Right, I think that's the indication of the corruption of all flesh. When it talks about all the things that were perished, the phrase after their kind is missing. Now, please note, it was Canaan that was cursed, not Ham. Some people try to say Ham was cursed, and they use it for all kinds of prejudice and, all kinds of problems and racist issues and whatnot. They'll say that Ham was cursed. And I said, no, the Bible says Canaan is cursed, not Ham. Canaan's cursed.
I cursed the firstborn.
Well, he says Canaan is cursed. He mentions him by name.
Yeah.
But Canaan was already there. So Canaan had to be present for him to curse him. He didn't say, okay, I'm going to curse your firstborn, which you're going to name Canaan. Because if that was the case, I wouldn't name my kid Canaan then. Because we go back to the legal aspects of authority, words mean things, right? So if Noah was cursing Ham's firstborn, naming him Canaan, if I was Ham, I'd say, fine, I'm going to name him Bill then, or whatever. I'm not going to name my kid Canaan because the curse is going to come on Canaan. You see what I'm saying? He had to have been there for the curse to be there. And I think one of the reasons why is because I speculate that Canaan may have had 6 fingers and 6 toes. Why? Because the giants were killed off later. Many of them did have 6 fingers and 6 toes. And they had to have got that attribute somewhere. So it makes sense to me that they probably got it from their great-granddaddy Canaan. Speculation, of course, but logically it makes sense. You know, the offspring had 6 fingers and 6 toes. They got it from somewhere, right? The land of Canaan is loaded with, and the offspring of Canaan are loaded with Nephilim genetics. And I already went through all this. Now, I saw this documentary called Seeds of Death, and it gives a really good analogy of how genetics work, especially with regard to GMO, genetic modification of organisms.
DNA is the inherited material of life.
DNA.
And it is where genes are structured. So we inherit half of our DNA from our mothers and half of our DNA from our fathers. And within the DNA are the genes that encode for all the structures of the body. So the DNA is like a blueprint. Just like an architect has a blueprint for a building, the DNA is the blueprint for all the structures of the body. So when a gene is switched on to function, the information within that gene is being used to manufacture a protein. And that protein then builds the structure of the body. And then proteins in the form of enzymes carry out all of the chemical reactions of the body that constitute the living organism. The process of genetic modification is a completely irreversible process. Once it has been carried out, it affects the reproductive cells of the organism. So any effect you have, for good or for bad, is then passed down through the subsequent generations of that particular organism. And that's true for plants and animals, indeed for any genetically modified organism.
So you see the problem? As soon as they started messing with the genetics, it got passed down through the reproductive cells, and it's not reversible, right? So we run into the situation where God clearly intended for Nephilim to be on the post-flood side, no matter which way you look at it. You know, a lot of the other Nephilim researchers say, well, angels continue to mate with women. Okay, then it must have been God's will for angels to come down and mate with women, because he still wanted giants for whatever reason after the flood. I say no, I believe it went through genetically through the 3 wives. Either way, you end up with the exact same net result. We still got giants after the flood. The question is, how did they show up? I think this is, if God was going to do that either way, that this is the more merciful way for it to have happened. Why do I say that? Because if it came through as a 50-50 female hybrid, 50-50 hybrid through the women, then that's actually a good thing, because this is what they call a Punnett square, where you want to figure out what your genetic, chances are of passing on an attribute to your offspring. You could do a Punnett square. Well, if she contributes, I got the red chromosome there, I call it a nephilosome, let's say a corrupted chromosome, and she contributes her bad X, and he contributes a good X, because he's got good X and Y, the 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, then you end up with a Nephilim female still. You still got a 50-50, right? Bad X, good X, or bad X, good Y. But if she contributes her good X and he contributes a good X or good Y, then you have a 100% normal child. Problem solved, right? What does Scripture say? The sins of the fathers are passed down 4 generations, 4 generations. There has to be a spiritual component to our physical DNA. How else do our poor choices, sin, get genetically passed down to our generations? There has to be a genetic component to DNA, or spiritual component to DNA, right? That's genetic. So my thesis on this is that what determined the odds? Because you got a 50-50 chance, right, of producing either normal or still tainted. I believe obedience. How many times do you see that people are redeemed through the obedience of the man of the house, the husband, right? Well, Shem, Ham, and Japheth are all good, but who screws up right away, right after the flood? Who's doing something bad? Ham. Ham's doing something bad with well, I believe it's his mother, where it says, uncover the nakedness of the father. We read in Leviticus that that's a reference to the mother. So very likely Ham's doing something with his mother. Now, you got to ask, why would he do that? My speculation on that is, after he had sex with his wife and produced possibly a 6-fingered, 6-toed child, he said, well, something's clearly wrong with my wife. You know, and, well, I'm probably not going to win a fight with my brothers. My dad's drunk and asleep. Maybe I'll go with my mom. It's the same logic that you see with the daughters of Lot. When the daughters of Lot see the Sodom and Gomorrah, and, of course, Lot's wife turns into a pillar of salt, they think they're the only ones left on earth. So they're like, well, you know, we're going to have to mate with dad so we can have offspring, so we can have children, right? I think the same logic may have been going through Ham's mind. But whatever the case may be, he's doing something wrong. Shem, of all three, is obviously the most obedient son. And how many generations for obedience? 1,000. 1,000 generations. So, praise God, Yeshua came through the line of Shem, right? Japheth must have had some issues too, because you got the Gog and Magog deal to deal with. So, you know, I'm thinking that through the obedience of the three sons, you know, every time they're having offspring, the odds are being played here. What are you going to end up with? You're going to end up with a good child or a tainted child? You know, I think that was a brilliant kind of a test, if you will, that God said, okay, the disobedience of you people before the flood led to me having to wipe out my entire creation. So let's see if you're going to obey me now. Oh, you're going to decide not to obey me? Well, there's going to be consequences. And you start seeing them through the line of Canaan. And they had to deal with those consequences. You know? But if you just listen to me and do what I tell you to do and live by my ways, I'm going to bless you 1,000 generations. Who comes through many generations later from Shem? Yeshua. Wow. Well, if you go this route, the idea of a fallen angel mating with, if you say the wives were just as pure as the sons of Noah, then you've got 100% normal female mating with bad angel, and you get a big mess genetically. The possibilities are not good of what happens. So in my opinion, if God had a plan one way or another to allow Nephilim on the other side, I think my thesis is a much more merciful way to allow that to happen. Because in this scenario, who did sin come through? Man, right? Men only get their Y chromosome from their fathers. So if there are men walking around with bad Y chromosomes, then you have unredeemable people on this earth. Yet Scripture says that God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Well, the only way that's possible is if the all can be redeemable. So they have to have pure Y chromosomes, which would not be possible if you mate with a fallen angel. You follow where I'm going with that? So, how they returned after the flood. Deuteronomy has a number of places where it talks about, like Deuteronomy 20:17, but thou shalt utterly destroy them, namely the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee. Well, that's where all those people came from. Genesis chapter 10, and Canaan begat Sidon, his first son, and Heth, who was the father of the Hittites. And the Jebusite, the Amorite, the Girgashite, the Hivite, see the same names? Do you see an angel anywhere in the picture? No. So the Bible tells you exactly where the post-flood giants came from. And going back to the scripture I mentioned earlier, Ham is the father of Canaan. From these three people, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, was the whole world populated. When you look up the names of these guys, oh boy, you find some really interesting names that show up. I mean, how do you know they name their children and their names have meanings, right? Esau came out red and hairy, so they named him Red and Hairy. That's what Esau means, right? Jacob's grabbing his heel, so they name him Heel Grabber. That's what Jacob means, right? So their names have meaning. Well, when you look at the names of the people in Genesis 10:6 through 20, you get names like Terror and Afflicted and Thunder and Anguish and Enclosure of Wrath. Okay, parent, what would prompt the proud parent of a newborn baby to turn to their spouse and say, Enclosure of Wrath, what do you think, honey? Yeah. Why would you name your kid those things? Unless there's something clearly wrong with that child. You know? Yeah, moistened morsel. What is going on? Blades opening the moistened morsel? What in the world are you talking about? Chuck Missler points out the names of the first 10 patriarchs before the flood, from Adam to Noah, and if you take the Hebrew meaning of their names and put it together in a paragraph, or a sentence here, you end up with, man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down teaching that his death shall bring the despairing rest. That's like the whole plan of the Bible given in the names of the first 10 patriarchs right there. So the names are significant, aren't they? You think God might have had a hand in maybe inspiring the parents of what they named their kid? Here? Yeah. Jared's name shall come down, or descended, because that's when the Watchers came down, in the days of Jared. Enoch teaching, because that's what he did. He taught against what happened with the Watchers. He was basically hired as the attorney in this little court case that took place in heaven. Methuselah, his death shall bring, the connotation is judgment. When Methuselah dies, flood. Methuselah died, 7 days later, flood. Incidentally, Joshua said that they didn't pick the 3 wives until 7 days before the flood. So he had a funeral and a wedding the same day. Despairing, well, I mean, if you have a child born right in the middle of the Clash of the Titans, that'd be a pretty bad thing, wouldn't it? You know, you'd name your kid Despairing. What hope is there, right? But after the Clash of the Titans, they named their child Rest. He was born after the first generation Nephilim. So following Chuck Missler's lead, I took the meanings of the names of the people in Genesis 10, 6 through 20, in the same order that they're given, put their meanings together in a paragraph, and this is what you end up with. He raged, a black terror, double straight afflicted trafficker. Black terror, drink thou anguish. Compass the chamber, thunder, compass the smiting. He was coming, their love, we shall rebel. That's Nimrod right there, we shall rebel. A double straight firebrand, travailing, affliction of water, blades opening the moistened morsel, forgiven ones bowing to spy. A trafficker, hunting terrors, trodden downsayers, the strangers draw near. Strangers of life, gnawing like thorns, they shall break loose, double woolen enclosures of wrath. That's a weird family tree you got going on there. And a really scary story. Yeah. I talked about we shall rebel. That's what Nimrod means. He's the man of many names. This is from my Babylon Rising book in DVD teaching. It says that Nimrod began to become a mighty one. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. Well, we could look at that a number of ways. Nimrod simply became a strong and powerful man. Nimrod began to become a giant, or Nimrod began to become a hunter of giants. Personally, I think all 3 are true. I think all 3 are applicable. The Septuagint clears it all up for you. It just tells you he began to be a giant upon the earth. The word began, that's used there, is that word I mentioned earlier that means to, has a sexual connotation. It's translated as prostitution later, sexual defilement. So through some sort of sexual defilement, he obviously did something to alter himself, and he began to suddenly become a giant. So you might think of like the Incredible Hulk. Remember Bruce Banner, normal guy, all of a sudden he got a heavy dose of gamma radiation. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry, right? He started to change from what he was into the Hulk. I think Nimrod's the first Hulk. The whole world's gathered together under his leadership, under one language, and they're trying to build this tower whose top might reach into heaven. We know the story. God comes down, confounds their language, and everybody leaves the Tower of Babel talking about the same guy. Now he has different names because of different languages. Everybody's talking about the same guy in different languages. So Nimrod becomes known by people by names like Gilgamesh, Baal, Melkart, Adonis, Dumuzi, Dionysus, Bacchus, Mithra, Orion, Apollo, Tammuz, Osiris, just to name a few. How do we know we're talking about the same guy? Because there are a lot of ancient depictions of these various other characters, and they all look the same. They're depicted in very similar poses, a lot of times dealing with a lion. You know, there's some kind of deal with the lion. What's Yeshua referred to as? Lion of the tribe of Judah. Exactly. You may have seen this picture before. We obviously know who's going to win that match. But there is a wrestling match of sorts taking place here. L.A. Marzulli calls it the cosmic chess match. Move and counter move. I believe that Nimrod is the primary piece on the devil's playing board. That he really found somebody in Nimrod. So I can work with this guy. Regarding Nimrod, again, he was at the same time as Abraham. We need to rethink Abraham. We all think of Abraham. We think Father Abraham, the big long beard, old guy. Well, he may eventually end up looking that way, but I think in the beginning he was probably more like this. Abraham was one tough dude, especially when you read about the Genesis 14 war. Josephus says the Genesis 14 war, which is 5 kings against the 4 kings, was a war with the offspring of the giants. This is about 400 years after the flood, and already they're having a war of 5 giants armies versus 4. This is Lord of the Rings. This is epic. Well, the 5 kings, they have this whole battle, and the victors take Lot and his family as spoils of war, right? Abraham says, I don't think so. Gets a band of guys together, 318 guys, and it says they slaughtered Kedar Laomer, who was the right-hand guy, General Patton of Amraphel, that Nimrod, according to the book of Joshua, Amraphel is Nimrod. So the 4 kings beat the 5 kings, take Lot, and Abraham's like, no, let's go. And he also had the allies in Mamre, Aner, and Eshcol, who were Amorite giants. So Abram actually had some good giants, if you will, on his side, fighting all these other guys. And just to give you an idea of scale, this is probably what they're looking like. Because Amos 2:9 says the Amorites got as tall as cedar trees. Well, a small cedar tree gets to 36 feet tall. The cedars of Lebanon got to 150 feet tall. So this is on the small side. So Abraham was one tough dude. And again, I depict all these exploits and stuff in this timeline here. But I also found something else interesting. When Sarah died, it says in multiple places that they negotiated with an individual named Ephron of the Hittites. Well, the Hittites are the terrors. That's what the Hittites mean, the terrors. And Ephron's name means fawn-like. So at least by his name, it appears, and if you look in various Hittite carvings, they have satyrs in their carvings. So could it be that Abraham was negotiating with a satyr for a burial plot for Sarah? The name would certainly indicate the possibility, at least. Interesting stuff when you start going through the scriptures. Our Bible is full of some amazing stories, but we miss so much of it. First of all, by not knowing what's really going on with Genesis chapter 6 and following, but also with our English and not really understanding what the Hebrew words mean and stuff like that. So, all post-flood accounts of the Nephilim can be traced back to the people in Genesis chapter 10, 6 through 20. And we see in Numbers 13:33 that the descendants, the Anakim, the sons of Anak, were called Nephilim that came from other Nephilim. These are Nephilim that came from Nephilim. Dr. Heiser agrees. He's got a whole teaching showing that there is a genetic tie from the post-flood Nephilim to the pre-flood Nephilim.
We saw the Nephilim, ha-Nephilim there. The Anakites are from the Nephilim. This phrase, from the Nephilim, is min ha-Nephilim. You'll notice there's no yod here. You have the same word spelled 2 different ways. I think the reason why this is done here is because this is the way it's spelled in Genesis 6. The writer wants to link these Nephilim after the flood with the ones before the flood. And if that's the case, if the Anakim came from, in other words, were related to the Nephilim from before the flood, you don't need the continual cohabitation. You have a genetic relationship intact, so to speak.
Is there evidence of the giants? Absolutely. If you haven't seen this book, I recommend you get it. The Genesis 6 Giants by Steve Quayle. It's an 8.5 by 11 book, about as thick as my Genesis book. This book right here. Full of documented accounts of giant bones that have been found and historical accounts of finding giants, stuff like that. Incredible book. When you see stones like this, you've seen the Baalbek stone. Have you seen that in documentaries and stuff like that, the stone at Baalbek? We can't move something like that today. We can't cut it, we can't quarry it, we can't move it. We don't have any idea how anybody did anything with stones like that. The best thing they can come up with is ancient aliens must have did it. Fire up the tractor beam, right? Let's move this thing across. No, we can't figure it out. Well, if we just let the scriptures tell us what's going on, what if we, took it literally? Amorites were as tall as cedar trees and strong as the oaks. What's interesting about that is Arnold Schwarzenegger, during his bodybuilding days, was known as, his nickname was the Oak. So I just scaled Arnold up to 36 feet tall, the size of a cedar tree. And, if you look at that, all of a sudden that stone's not so impressive anymore. Hey, Arnold, stop flexing for the camera. Get over here. Give me a hand. Right? And I found this book by a guy named Michael Aloof, History of Baalbek, page 41. After the flood, when Nimrod reigned over the Lebanon, he sent giants to rebuild the fortress of Baalbek. So I'm telling you right there, in the ancient record, giants rebuilt Baalbek. I found this picture when I was looking for pictures of Arnold. I thought it was pretty cool. When he was doing Conan the Barbarian, he was with Wilt Chamberlain and Andre the Giant. Now, not only is Arnold very muscular, but he's a pretty big guy himself. He's about 6 feet tall.
6'5".
Is he 6'5"? Yeah.
6'4", 6'5".
Yeah, I didn't know that, but yeah, I knew he was about.
Ferrigno was 6'5".
I knew he was about 6 feet. So look at Arnold next to these guys. He looks like a little kid next to these guys, right? Now, just let me demystify gigantism for you. A lot of times we think, okay, angels mate with women. That's a supernatural thing. They're going to have a supernatural child. It's going to be a giant. Okay, we can make that mental leap, right? We can just kind of assume that that would be the byproduct of a supernatural event. Well, when it comes to empirical science and evidence, I think there's a better example in the ligers. Ligers are an unnatural hybridization of lions and tigers, right? And the video I'm going to show you, listen closely as to the explanation about why these things get huge. They just keep growing until they die. This is why.
This big guy is a liger. Yes, a liger. And trainer Doc Antle and his partner Rajani have the biggest one in the world.
This is Hercules, who is our liger boy, 900 pounds and 12 feet tall. He's a gigantic kid because he's a liger. Father lion, mother tiger makes him...
Father is a lion, mother is a tiger.
Makes him the liger.
Hercules is skilled at, well, eating about 100 pounds of meat a day.
Everything about him seems exaggerated. They seem to live longer, they eat more. We've never seen anything happen in the ligers except bigger, stronger, faster. It's theorized that ligers are this enormous size because the inhibitor growth gene exists in the female lion and in the male tiger. So when you switch around and you get a male lion breeding with a female tiger, creating the liger, you get this gigantic size. Nothing tells it when to stop. In the wild, this enormous size wouldn't necessarily be of any advantage because it would require so much more food. Samson here can readily eat 25 pounds of food in a sitting, where an adult lion can subside on 7 to 10 pounds of food.
Helps you understand why the scriptures said the land devours itself, right? If you got giants, they need a lot to eat, don't they? Yeah.
Whether human or animal.
Whatever, you know, it's got to maintain its metabolism, so it's got to have a high caloric intake, right? But did you hear what he said? The reason the ligers get so big is because the growth inhibitor gene is, right, it's in the male tiger and the female lion. So when you get the other way around, when you get the male lion and the female tiger, there's no growth inhibitor gene telling it to stop growing. The tigon, which is a male tiger and the female lion, grows to about the size of normal lions and tigers. Whereas the liger, they just keep growing and growing and growing. So it's as simple as turning on or turning off a genetic code or removing it. You know, that's gigantism. Turn off the growth inhibitor gene. I've got one in me that says Rob stops growing at 5'11" at about 16 years of age. You've got one in you that says when you stop growing. Turn that off or remove it, and then you just keep going. So that also would answer the question of, you know, did the giants mate with women? Well, I mean, it's unrealistic to think a 36-foot tall woman and or 36-foot tall man, you know, and a 5 or 6 foot tall woman, unless they grew at a normal rate. You know, so through their teen years and into their early 20s, if they grew in the same pace that normal humans do, they would have still been the appropriate size for human interaction
before they got too big.
Before they got too big. You know, eventually.
Could they mate with each other?
Yes, exactly.
Female
giants, yes, I believe there were. That's the next point right here. Were the giants sterile? Now, there are some hybrids that we have, you know, various types of animal hybrids that are out there, that when you create these hybrids, they're sterile. They can't reproduce, like donkeys or some of these other ones, or mules. Yeah, some of these, I forget which one it is, but I know that some of those can't reproduce. So that led a lot of Nephilim researchers to suggest that the Nephilim were sterile also. I said, no, of course not. It says right there in Numbers 13:33, these were sons of Anak. Anak was a son of Arba, who was an Amorite, giants. So clearly they can reproduce. We see in 2 Samuel 21, 16, 22 that these were men of great stature with 6 fingers and 6 toes, born to the giant. These 4 were born to the giant in Gath, so clearly they were not sterile. They could reproduce. So were the
Samuel said that they had 6 fingers.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, right there. So were there female Nephilim too? Oh, I believe there were. And so this section I call it Suspicious Women and the Rise of the X-Men. Because, yeah, I believe that there definitely were female also. Otherwise, why does God say kill the women too? And the children? Get rid of all of it. Wipe them all out. And, these are the people, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, nations greater and mightier. He says destroy them, and also says don't marry the women. Don't take their daughters. So there's obviously something going on with these women for God to say, don't marry them, don't have anything to do with them, kill them. So either God is prejudiced and schizophrenic and into random acts of genocide, or he's got a legitimate reason for saying the women are allotted the same destruction the men are. When you look in the various mythologies, Josephus again said the angel-human hybrids, the Nephilim first generation, were likened unto the Greek Titans. Well, in the Greek myths, you had male and female god and goddesses, Titans. So they're there. In Scripture, we see all kinds of interesting goddesses. Diana of the Ephesians, Ashtoreth of the Zidonians, the Queen of Heaven, right? We read in other textbooks about, Isis and, Ashtaroth and all this kind of stuff. So, we've got the hybrids. I mean, look at her feet and wings and the whole deal like that. So, yeah, I think there were female Nephilim too. Then we have to deal with these people. Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Now, the Egyptians descended from Mitzrayim, right? Egypt, Mitzrayim. And Akhenaten and Nefertiti show up around 1300 BC time frame. So they're pretty early, and they apparently were born this way. And, she's not just wearing a cool hat. She's covering up one heck of a dome of a head. Right? And there's all kinds of depictions of them, and with their children playing on their laps. These were cone heads. Egyptian cone heads. And a lot of times when you look in the cone head deal, they were in positions of royalty in various cultures. Certainly this was the case in Egypt. But we're finding all kinds of other ones. I mean, are these Nephilim skulls? Well, we're still trying to figure all that out. Many scholars and researchers are out there looking into the issue, but there's something up with them. This one was recently found. This is 18 December 2012. A news article said, the incredible alien skull discovered in a Mexican cemetery. 1,000-year-old skeleton. Archaeologists in Mexico today revealed the astonishing skull of a person suffering from cranial disfiguration. Yeah, I'd say so. And then what do we do with finds like this? This was an artist's rendition of a fetus that was found in a mummy of a pregnant woman. They found a mummified pregnant woman, and they saw that she was pregnant, and they dug around, looked in there some more, and found the remains of the fetus, 7-month-old fetus, looking like that, looking like alien. So, yeah. Some people think these skulls are the result of cranial headboarding, where they strap boards to the baby's head. Well, yeah, we know that the baby's skull at a young age is you can mess around with it. It's malleable. But that's not going to change the suture pattern. We have a frontal lobe, 2 parietal plates, and an occipital plate. We got that vertical line going across the top. Well, these don't have that vertical line. Now, some researchers say that the vertical suture here can fuse together. Okay, fair enough. It remains to be proven that that's the case here. But how do you increase their cranial capacity? They're not just a different shape. If you pour something in there to check the volume of the skull, many times they find, I think this one had about 20 or 25% more cranial capacity than a woman of comparable size with a normal skull. Some of the other ones, the male ones, are much bigger and more robust, have been upwards of 40% larger brains. So yeah, you can strap boards to a baby's head, but it's not going to increase your intellectual capacity and give you bigger brains. It's going to change the shape of your skull. You know, and you see other ones like this. I call this the first Home Alone. Oh no! I've got a cone head. I mean, look at the size of that kid's head. It's as big as his body. You know, that's huge. A friend of mine came to town. He's the one that originally gave me this skull. It was white. I painted it. He was doing some research on the Nephilim on the internet, and as soon as he started Googling Nephilim and stuff, he started seeing my work out there. And we hadn't seen each other for like 5 years. I met him in Texas. He moved to New York. Hadn't seen him in 5 years. He says, "Oh man, I didn't know Rob was into this." So he calls me up. He's like, "Dude, I'm doing some research, and lo and behold, I see your stuff all over the internet. I didn't know you're into the Nephilim and stuff." I said, "Yeah, you know, it's something I've been studying for a while now." He said, "Well, I'm coming back to Texas. We need to talk." So he comes to Texas. We go out to a Cracker Barrel, and he gives me that skull at Cracker Barrel. He's like, "Maybe this will help with your research." I'm like, "Dude, are you kidding? This is awesome. Where'd you get this? Wow." Well, it turns out he knew a woman who was doing research in Peru, and she had access to the original skull, and she made a mold, cast it, and whatnot, and gave it to him, and he gave it to me. So I was like, "Yeah, I could definitely." And then I later tracked down another resource where I could get the male counterpart for. But I mean, look at this skull back here. I mean, look at these things. Some of these have really big heads, you know. An artist did like a sculpture. They took this same skull right here, and they started to build it up like, you know, forensic science would do, you know, adding the musculature and flesh and stuff like that, and said that this is what she probably looked like. You know, taking that skull, putting flesh on her and whatnot, she probably ended up looking something like that. This also shows it's superimposed over a normal skull. The difference in the size of the brain, you know, an overlaid comparison. Flow. You know, so I'm wondering, you know, could it be that this is what the wives of the sons look like? You know, and maybe if that's not appealing to you, maybe it was something more like this. It's still emulation. You know, those beehive hairdos, you know, it has the same effect of looking like a cone head. You know, minus the increased intellectual capacity. But could that have been what they look like? I don't know. There are people that lived after the flood that did look like that. They had to have gotten those traits somewhere. So, you know, when we're talking, you know, people get all upset when I talk about the idea that Nephilim could have possibly got on the ark. They get all flipped out. I'm like, well, what if they were just because of the genetic manipulation? You know, if you look at a gorilla, gorillas have really big heads. You know, well, I mean, what does it take to manipulate the human genome to end up with this? What were they capable of doing? Did they have the radar of a bat, the sonar of a dolphin? I mean, could it have simply been that we're talking about X people? If you ever watch the X-Men, it's all about genetic mutation, giving these normal-looking people supernatural type abilities. There had to have been some kind of appeal that led to people apparently going along with this transhumanism in the pre-flood world. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about tomorrow. The same appeal is happening in our time today. Our time today, transhumanism, man, it's all the rage. You know, it's going to cure Alzheimer's. It's going to cure this, cure that. You know, and oh, by the way, what if you could run like a cheetah and have eyes like an eagle, and you know, have all the benefits of the animal kingdom incorporated in Wolverine? You know, I mean, what kid doesn't want to be Spider-Man, right? The sales pitch is rather enticing. I call them X people because I believe it was the X chromosome that was tainted. It is interesting that this particular X person from the X-Men in real life just so happens to have 6 toes in real life. Interesting. Now, this last slide here is a video I'm going to play. Think about everything that I've been talking about right here. Now, the video I'm going to show you is from a TED Talk. You know, those TED Talks where they talk about different things. This is one called Epigenetics by Courtney Griffin. And I think it will help you to understand what I've been saying all along. Now, they're not talking about Nephilim. They're just talking about genetics and how genetics work. But if you listen to what they're saying and apply what I've been saying to what they're saying, I think you'll understand, you know, where I'm going with all of this.
The human genome is like a Bible where everything was written down. The hope and the expectation was that once we had that book in front of us, and all the letters. We could just read down the pages, and we would understand how the body was put together.
They estimated that the human genome, the book of life, would contain around 100,000 genes.
And then when they started sequencing, they popped down to 60, and then it popped down to 50. And slowly it went down to a much smaller number.
30,000, 25,000. As the mapping drew to an end, it appeared that humans had about the same number of genes as fish and mice.
In fact, we found out that the human genome is probably not as complex and doesn't have as many genes as plants do. So that then made us really question, well, if the genome has less genes in this species versus this species, and we're more complex potentially, what's going on here?
So few genes didn't appear enough to explain human complexity. Even more startling, it turned out the same key genes that make a fruit fly, a worm, or a mouse also make a human. Chimpanzees share 98.9% of our genome.
No, they don't. Liar.
So what accounts for the vast differences between species? Might genes not be the whole story?
What is it that makes our cells different from one another? What makes them look and behave differently? What is it that makes a muscle cell, for instance, look different from a neuron? After all, these cells contain exactly the same DNA, but it's their epigenetic instructions that help tell them which genes to turn on and which ones to turn off. And with those different genes at play, these can become very different cells.
As epigenetic therapy takes off, so do the expectations for this new science. Many believe that a multitude of complex diseases, from Alzheimer's to autism, may have epigenetic triggers. Something that could control genes directly, switch them on or off. But how exactly did these tags go about silencing a gene? This odd strain of agouti mice provides a visual clue. Despite the difference in color and size, they're twins, genetically identical.
Mice contain a gene called agouti, which makes them obese and yellow and susceptible to diseases like cancer and diabetes. This gene and these traits can be passed down from generation to generation through DNA, so that an agouti mother will give rise to a fat, yellow, disease-susceptible offspring if that offspring contains the agouti gene. Now here's something interesting about the agouti gene. It can be turned off if silencing epigenetic marks accumulate around it. So, if a pregnant agouti mother is fed a diet which is supplemented with these silencing epigenetic marks, those marks will be chemically transmitted to the DNA of her embryo, where they'll accumulate around that agouti gene and effectively turn it off. Her embryo will maintain those marks, and so it will be born and grow up to be an adult mouse that's thin and brown and healthy. Even though this mother is genetically identical at the DNA level to both sets of these offspring.
So what switched the agouti gene off in the thin mouse? A chemical tag called a methyl molecule. Composed of carbon and hydrogen, it affixes near the agouti gene, shutting it down. Living creatures possess millions of tags like these. Some, like methyl molecules, attach to DNA directly. Other types grab the proteins called histones around which DNA wraps and tighten or loosen them to turn genes on or off.
And in simple terms, this contact can be thought of as hugging the DNA. And if these proteins hug the DNA very tightly, then it is hidden from view for the cell, and a gene that is hidden cannot be utilized.
These tags and others control gene expression through a vast network in the body called the epigenome.
Epigenetics literally translates into just meaning above the genome. So if you would think, for example, of the genome as being like a computer, the hardware of a computer, the epigenome would be like the software that tells the computer when to work, and how much.
What distinguishes cells is not their genes, but how these genes are switched on or off by epigenetics.
And as development unfolds, certain switches need to be thrown. And you can think of it as a light switch. Switch on the gene, the light is shining, the gene is active, makes a cell do a certain thing. Or the light switch is off, everything is dark, that gene is off.
To turn off the overactive agouti gene, researchers gave pregnant mothers foods rich in vitamins like B12 or folic acid, from which they could make those methyl tags that silence genes. The change was small, the effect huge. Fat yellow mothers gave birth to thin brown pups, no longer prone to disease. Agouti mice revealed the impact of an epigenetic change, one that occurred without altering a single chemical letter in the agouti gene.
I knew that epigenetics existed. I knew that it was a controlling factor for DNA activity, whether genes are silenced or not. But to say that epigenetics would have a major role in disease development, so I had no concept for that. The fact that this could have such a huge impact and could explain a whole host of things we couldn't explain before.
The implications, if they apply to humans, are sobering. If the thousands of genes identified by the Human Genome Project symbolized the words in the Book of Life, it was the epigenome that determined how that book got read.
Does that make more sense? That's basically what I'm proposing as to how and why the Nephilim returned after the flood. So that concludes this presentation. We'll get more into Return of the Nephilim now and in the future tomorrow.